evidence of how the species are impacted by threats. So together with STEP, Southern Tanzania Elephant Program, and Tanzania Forest Service, of course, we have had fundraising and advising for this law enforcement program, doing capacity building and providing funding for monthly patrols, together with Village Game Scouts. So it's a joint form of patrols. This program has had some key success, especially in terms of reducing the most prominent form of disturbance, logging and farming, whereas snaring is still very tough to be decreased because it's a more diffuse and more elusive kind of form of disturbance. So we need to continue to enforce the protection. And what we are trying to do essentially is to make sure that the research is always giving feedback to conservation. So, research informs protection, and we monitor protection in the sense that we monitor the effort of patrols, and we monitor the hotspots of illegal incidents, so that we can evaluate and monitoring the impact of such law enforcement, and perhaps we can then give a feedback to them in terms of areas where we need more monitoring, where the species are more vulnerable and so on. So this ideally, is the system that we want to have in place. So the second case studies, briefly, is basically based on vertebrate surveys, rapid surveys that we did between 2005 and 2010, mainly under the CPF funding. Some of these forests that you see in yellow. And it was astonishing the amount of species that were revealed, because we had a very strong team of experts from each tax. So forest tax, vertebrate tax, except fish. So if we compare the from 2007 by Neil Burgess and others to the one that we published in 2014, we basically got 24% more endemic species found in the forest, 27 new species. The majority were amphibians and reptiles, so small species very endemic of some forests. And as well, this is our friend, the Uzungu elephant shoe that we discovered in 2005. So really, these surveys have helped unveiling the exceptional importance of this forest, and the government, along with other evidence, has declared a network of nature reserves, which are the ones in blue, in purple, which is pretty outstanding, I have to say. Some of these forests are really important, like in Kingu and so on. But I want to focus in another forest, which is Minziro. This is in the northwest corner of Tanzania. The very northwest corner is a lowland forest, it's not Eastern Arc, it's near Uganda. And here we are working with Dr. Emmanuel Martin from Mweka, where we did the first survey of human disturbance, biodiversity in general, and mammoths. We found the first record in country of the African golden cat, but we also found that this species is very threatened by proximity to villages, because there are villages all around. So the good news is that Emmanuel with colleagues is now doing a new survey, and he was engaged in some conservation projects to try and work with the nature reserve, again another new gazetted nature reserve, to improve the situation. And in terms of partnership, which I mentioned our work with Mweka, we do have an MOU with Mweka, and we also have an EU-funded Erasmus Plus project, Contan. There is a corner right there where you can see under the tents a display of this project, so you're welcome to have a look when you can. Where we are working with Dar es Salaam Zoo and Mweka to upgrade the curricula in biodiversity monitoring with universities in Europe. And this is really, I think, a good example of partnership between European and Tanzanian institutions that can promote new generation responsible for conservation. And I move to the third case study, which is comes from the team network that some of you may have heard about. It's a network of standardized data collection sites, which we try to expand. We now have 37 sites by using data which are already collected, so it's a kind of voluntary network. with the same protocol that I mentioned before, camera trapping for mammoths. And this has the potential to give a standardized signal of how these protected areas are faring across the tropics. So it's a different scale, obviously. One of the papers about deriving the wildlife picture index. This is a statistic which is quite simple. It's based on species richness, so any change would be lower richness and lower abundance. And it's actually an official indicator for the CBD, for the Aichi targets and post-Aichi targets. So by doing that, we can provide a measure of indicators that are needed to evaluate the impact, the progress towards achieving global targets. So obviously we are not directly engaging in conservation, but we are providing data that can inform on the situation. And another study which we have just completed is different in the sense that we now have the landscape around protected areas, 50 kilometers around protected areas, in terms of, for example, in forest cover, and how the disturbance influence the wildlife within protected areas. What we found is pretty dramatic, because as you see across these 37 sites, with increasing density outside protected areas, the species richness declines within protected areas drastically, and also it declines with decreasing forest cover. So this is interesting, I think, ecologically, it's pretty dramatic, but it can also inform policy, because we have the new Montreal Biodiversity Agreement, where countries are committed to enhance the protected area network to 30%. But here is an alert that you really need to have the good condition to do that. You need to be sure that there is an environment around the protected area to be able to conserve biodiversity within. So, in summary, we have different, research can have different impact depending on the scale, on the long-term investment, the long-term engagement. For example, we have done UCN red listing, reassessments. We have done for the endemic species. We have contributed, obviously with other colleagues and other evidence, to upgrading protected area, supporting the efficiency of some protected areas, and new have come as a consequence. There are reforestation projects, there are connectivity projects, Trevor is going to talk about that. Whereas, if we scale, like the example I show you, inform policy, like the last study I show, and of success of conservation. So a few reflections. Very basically, very simply, applied research relevant to threat mitigation. If not, otherwise it's not applied research. It's not relevant to conservation. I do think that researchers can engage into supporting government and other agencies to help conservation. You cannot just come, collect our data. That doesn't help conservation. Long-term investment in one area is critical to success. Whereas, rapid surveys or large can have other effects. And I think it's important that there is a global network of scientists now, more and more data also in biology, for these kind of studies that can actually form policy and help making decisions.
Thank you. We have time for a couple of questions. Stand up, introduce yourself. So, on the rapporteur, which I forgot to introduce, Julius Lasway can write down your question and your name. So please, I have up 2 questions. As I say, stand up. Yes, behind there.
Hi, my name is Israel Burr, professor at Montana State University, Bozeman, United States. Great talk, thank you. 2 quick thoughts or questions. What is the effort going on in translating this great research into policy documents or something that can be translated for policy or government applications? Is there any effort going on in that regard? Secondly, for example, the papers that were published in open access journals that local Tanzanians access and read them. Like, how is the research being complemented with efforts to make them readily accessible that government officials and local people can access them? Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, starting from the last one, yes, absolutely. We try to publish as much as possible in open access, especially in these big journals that can have a high impact. But also we try to facilitate. For example, the project I mentioned, the content project, we will provide to universities here all the references that are needed for integrating the teaching learning. There is an e-learning platform done by European institutions that can be that will be by all the references. For the first question, well, I don't have a concrete example, but I think reports like the IPBES, the 2019 report, basically they come out of primary research like the one we do. So I believe by doing research, eventually you can contribute these reports and therefore inform policies.
Thank you. Okay, time is over. I have to introduce the next speaker, which is a change. He is Professor Agustin Mweka, a colleague of mine from Norwegian University of Science and Technology. And he will talk about managing environmental toxicology and pollution. So we will be 8 speakers. And the first one was the second on the list. No, the second one is not here, but he is tomorrow. So he will be skipped tomorrow.
Okay, thank you very much. And last year, I met him when he was doing his PhD in at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology. As you might understand, I am a Norwegian by accident and an African by design. so I'm going to use that part of our everyday life. They go from prescription drugs and non-prescription drugs, personal care products, to chemical additives, as you have been drinking water here since we came, plastic bottles. A little bit more about that later. And all those ones that go through sewage treatment plants, enter into the environment, agricultural runoff, go to our food resources, to our aquatic organisms, and come back to our food table, and then we eat them and we enjoy our. And come back to our food table, and then we eat them and we enjoy our. We call those emerging environmental contaminants. And when you add climate change to it, we call it multiple environmental stressors. The importance about this is that it's difficult to think that maybe there's no industry here, massive industry here in Moshi, that it doesn't affect you. These contaminants, we know they can travel by atmospheric transportation or by oceanic transportation and reach areas where you normally don't expect them. If you go in the Arctic Circle, in the Svalbard of Norway, the polar bears or the animals there, they have the highest environmental contaminant that you can find anywhere in any organism. Yet, there are no industries there. Zero industries. You can ask, how does those contaminants? These are normal. When they get there, and then all these ones that come from our houses, from the hospitals, from municipal landfills, industries, they enter effluents to water treatment plant, to store them used in agriculture, they come to our food, and then we put it around our daily lives. And the animals in the national parks here, they are not exempted from it. A fellow now working in Uganda, Tanzania here, trying to see whether lions are very much exposed to contaminants, like all the mining that happen in all these national parks, whether lions are exposed to heavy metals, that will endanger their health and sustainability. So, but this is an example of one of the things we have been doing in Nigeria. We went to several rivers, collected fish samples. What you can see here is fish that have different pairs of gonads. Like this fish is a normal fish with 2 pairs of testes. This is a fish with ovary and testes together. And And this is another fish with the eggs and 2 pairs of testes. You can ask yourself, if these fishes can be like this, is it possible that these things that are making these fish to be like this can also have human beings? Because I normally tell my students, that if we suspect something is wrong with a fish, you can go and collect fish, 100, 200, use cell cultures to study about it. But unfortunately, I cannot ask you people to drink as much of this plastic very flexible so that I can see what will happen to you. I can't do that. So, what do we do? You can see I'm pointing to plastic a lot. There's a reason. So we have published a lot of papers, many papers, showing that all these contaminants that you find in the environment that affect organisms, they have the potential to affect human beings. To have to use substantial and circumstantial evidence. This is a study that shows exactly the same thing. However, I am sure most of you have seen this kind of scene. This is a scene in front of a normal shop in Nigeria. A normal shop. They throw it on the street. I'm sure maybe that happens in Tanzania here. I was encouraged that it's not allowed to bring plastic into Tanzania. President, this thing we have been drinking here. This is another dumping site from a place in Nigeria. Almost 90% of everything that we find here are plastic-derived plastic waste. This is Koke Lagoon in the middle of Accra, Ghana. I was there. So during the rainy season like now, this is what this lagoon looks like. All the rivers in the surrounding suburbs of Accra, they empty into the Southern Atlantic Ocean, bordered at Accra, and they bring all these plastic contaminants into Accra, and that's how this place looks like during the rainy season. Like now, if you go there, you can see this kind of thing. So, why is plastic pollution very problematic? This thing we have been drinking here is plastic, is very flexible. But the thing that makes this plastic flexible is not part of this plastic. It was added in this plastic to make it flexible. We call it phthalates, phthalate esters. We say in chemistry that they are not covalently bound to this plastic, but if you heat this bottle up, all those things that make this plastic flexible, they will enter into this water, and if you drink it, it's not good for you. And then we assume that globally, we know that there is a global epidemic, obesity epidemic in the world. For example, in 1995, it was assumed that 200 million obese adults worldwide, and 18 million of them are under 5 years old. And then, fast forward to 2000, the number of this category increased to 300 million. Then if you fast forward to 2014, it was estimated that 41 million children under the age of 5 years old are obese or overweight. And if you fast forward a bit to the 48% of these 41 million of overweight children are found in Asia, and 25% are found in Africa. And if you assume that the total number of obese or young children in Africa nearly double over the 4 years period, going from 1.3 million from 5.4 million, you can ask yourself, why is this? Obesity has some, genetic component and exercise, but it doesn't explain it all. Because the genetic component of Africans or these children have been 10 years. Something has changed. They are being exposed to plastic or plastic contamination through several things. Can you imagine how many things that we're eating here that are packaged in plastic since we came here? Think about it. The food there, the cakes, everything, they are packaged in plastic. The ground you take you buy them ice cream, they are packaged in plastic. That has changed. In other words, lifestyle has changed over these years. And we assume that probably it is these plastic contaminants that drive this obesity. I'm not going to go to the technical part because all these compounds that are in plastic are very much important in driving receptors in the body that help or contribute to how we regulate fat. I remove that slide because it becomes too technical. In case if you're wondering, a BMI of anybody that is more than 30, that's 30 or more, is clinically considered as obese. And in fish, we call this condition factor. a condition factor of 2 or more is called good health. But good health for what reasons? Because we have shown in Nigeria, all those fish that you saw that they were contaminated with these contaminants, they will have a condition factor of 2 or above, which generally should be negative. But in aquaculture, in fisheries, when a fish has a condition factor of 2, it means that the fish is good and living well. But when you have a fish that is terribly contaminated, that under normal circumstances, that should be in a very bad shape and is looking very good, something is wrong. And we believe that is because these things are driving lipid metabolism. So the question is, does these plastic contaminants that you find in plastic, does they threaten what I call the beach bodies? Because these plastic contaminants, they bind to these receptors in the body. We call them peroxisome preferred activated receptors. They are the things that make your body to have good cardiovascular circulation. They are in the liver that regulate lipid metabolism. They are in adipose tissue that are the thing that help you to metabolize lipids to different parts of the body, muscles, and in the walls of the cells. So these contaminants, plastic or other related products, they bind to these receptors and basically change how you partition lipids in the body. And basically, that's what drives obesity in all animals and in human beings. So, what does that mean? Plastic problem. Despite their occurrence magnitude in the environment, there is only limited scientific both for macro and microplastics. And the plastic are also used for multiple applications. To be honest, we can't do without them. When I live here, I'm going to COP28. Last year in Egypt, I had the opportunity to say hello to Paul Kagame, but I didn't come so far to ask him, sir, why did you come to place total ban on plastic in Rwanda? I didn't ask him that because we didn't come that far. But we need to have some level of control for plastic. But banning plastic totally doesn't make sense because I don't think we can live without plastics. And then, the compounds that I'm talking about, they are called phthalate esters or bisphenol A. If you want, you can go and look around. I think that make this thing very flexible. Yeah. And of course, estimated 4.8 to 12.7 of plastic are deposited in our waste on annual basis. But of course, in some countries in Norway, that's a good control. But there's no developed or waste management processes that are found in developing countries. Not in Nigeria, I don't know about here in Tanzania, not in Ghana, and in many countries. So, I want to conclude a little bit. I'm going to touch something else before I go. Sustainable environmental protection program in developing countries is very important, and they will require development of environmental watch techniques and educate local experts, which will be very important for a university like this in order to apply and use techniques. They will be very good to develop the production of environmental education materials to be launched for management purposes. And implementation of special education, environmental education projects and strategic institutions that involve stakeholders and related agencies. And also offer courses that include specially designed courses on request for local environmental experts, which is aimed to continuous or dynamic monitoring of environmental impacts on pollution. And then initiate and sustainable climate education and research collaboration between institutions and the coalition of the building in order to conclude and manage environmental pollution. Now, I want to show you something which I think is the next threat that is facing institutions in Africa. I need to play this video every week.
like it. Of course, the author would have to pay some kind of publishing fee. Yeah, okay, that's reasonable. What, like a couple $100? Yeah, I was thinking maybe $11,000. What? Yeah, $11,000. You put your article on our website. Everybody can read. Why so much? Oh, we know all the costs. What costs? Reviewing the article. Yeah, we don't pay reviewers. We guilt them into it because it's good for science. Okay, without formatting. You're a 12-year-old piece. We gotta publish it. That costs money. It's a PDF. Little website. Kaylee does it in 2 seconds. You're a niece. Besides, who's gonna be able to afford this? People. Why? Regret. Lady. Researchers have to publish work to keep their job. One of the most prestigious journals around. So it's extortion. Here at Nature, we're doing crime. Culture's so dramatic. So let me get this straight. You want to charge researchers $11,000 to publish open access work, thereby ensuring that only researchers with the most money get to publish an article, which defeats the purpose of having open access articles in the first place. And this is guaranteed to be profitable because researchers likely get their dependent on a predatory system that values publishing in high-impact journals. This, of course, is insane.
So the reason why I showed you which I'm going to conclude now is because, in my opinion, this is something I have seen all across Africa and many developing countries about presenting jobs. This, in my opinion, is maybe the next form of academic colonialism, because all of you guys here that are in this university of elsewhere, you are dependent on these kind of publications in order to be promoted. And that's why everybody rushing to all these journals that doesn't care one bit about scientific quality. And then, they are only interested in their money. And I think it's very important that institutions like this think about this now. So, the question is whether open access publication represents a threat to scientific productivity and scientific quality. And does open access represent modern imperialistic scientific approach? And again, people should watch out for this. AI, whether you like it or not, is going to turn science upside down. And the earlier, I'm preaching this to my university in Norway too. The earlier we start thinking about artificial intelligence, I know a lot of students now, they write papers with ChatGPT and then they try to publish it. And that is going to change science. We are still at the early stage, but it's going to be terribly, terribly, disastrous for science. You guys should watch about it. And thank you very much.
I did not see the connection though, but I understand what you're saying. But also for we have only 1 minute. So one short question. One, stand up, introduce yourself, and speak loudly.
My name is Isaac. I'm a student here. I'm doing a course in African wildlife ecology and conservation. So in that light of conservation and ecology, I want to see how this wildlife toxicology is affecting wildlife ecology right now. Like, are there studies that have been done to look at the effects of BPA on wildlife? That's my question.
I thought it was a comment, but what was the question? You can direct me, so I can understand.
Are there studies like, for example, in African wildlife, like zebras, buffalo, do they find traces of plastic in their systems?
Yeah. I don't know, but I think it will be important to study about that. And of course, you must understand, I just use those BPA and the talents to, underscore the consequences of plastic in the environment. There are certain contaminants that are even worse than BPA. I don't know if most of you here has heard about compounds that we call PFAS. They are called polyfluorinated acute substances. This is a group of compounds that is, in my opinion, has revolutionized, industry and domestic and appliances and everything. PFAS, for example, if you have a cooking pan in your house that is non-stick, the only reason why it doesn't stick is because it's coated with PFAS. This laptop here hasn't caught fire since we are here because it's coated with what we call flame retardants, and PFAS is one of them. Your telephone hasn't caught fire since we are here because it's coated with PFAS. So this group of compound, I would be more concerned of compound like that for the wildlife, and of course, insecticide, DDTs, and all those ones that are simply used in Africa. As well as
that we have a few months and the application together with the knowledge and you know about developing conservation technology program. It was mentioned earlier today, and this is part of what we think is also a good part of technology study program in Tanzania. Is there? Okay. Sorry, next speaker, no, I think is Rocky Bara. Everybody knows him because he's part of the committee. Organization committee, okay. We have no refuse stuff there, and then I think people have no switch in between. Is there also 5 minutes delayed on the other room?
Change the topic of management effectiveness of our protected areas. Of course, we are managing these protected areas for many years. One question is whether it's very easy to think that perhaps Africa is not managing its protected areas very well. We saw Rovero here has just told us as we go from the center to the periphery. So I'm going to use a few minutes here to run you through this very interesting topic. We do management of protected areas, but are we moving in the right direction? Both in terms of site level, regional level, and global level. How do we compare? Important aspect of our life as conservation officers. Before I go, there are two scenarios here. There's what we call protected area management effectiveness. That measures is managing. But there is what we call protected area effectiveness. It measures outcomes of that particular management of the ecosystem. There are two aspects. And I should emphasize here that over the years, I think these two concepts have actually confused the word in terms of how we interpret or we label whether somebody is doing good or without knowing or not. And we have come at a place, as I will conclude, where it is not clear when you say a place is being managed well, but. So we are saying, why do we need? Because we need to know whether we are going in the right direction. The right direction as a park manager level, at a policy level for the minister, at a continental level. Now we've gone into international agreements, you know, like when the World Commission on Protected Areas because we have to be able to see we are moving in the right direction, regardless of where you are, regardless of your scale. So we are asking, are protected areas being effectively managed or conserving the values for which they exist? Let's Serengeti. We camp people, we do patrols, yes. Are we attaining what we really focused when we gazetted Serengeti? It's an important question. Our conservation interventions and management activities achieving their objectives. This is disturbing a lot of globally. And there are numerous and numerous publications. But another complication actually is not about the question. It's about the methodology to do so. Because the question itself is complex. Things on the ground are complex. There's a lot of factors. So how do we handle, which method do we use to arrive to say this is actually well managed or this is not? And unfortunately, because of trying to, to fumble around, we have generated close to 200 methodologies since the late 80s, early 90s. And it is very hard now to, to do, to collate and come down to conclusions that we can say we are in a particular direction. So in 2005, Atkins, he has worked in Tanzania, I worked with him also. He is from Queensland. Develop this framework. So you can have your method, you name it, but don't go away from this particular framework. and I think that was an error because the World Commission on Protected Area accepted this as a guidance globally for anyone to develop a method for measuring protected area management effect. So there was a proliferation now of methods. The WWF, GRAPAM, MET, what, and there are like 200 methodologies. They claim to say they are based on this particular framework. But people try to compare them. There are actually yes and no's in that particular, directions. So there is pressure, all around to try to say I'm managing my area well. And this is not Tanzania, it's not Africa, it's not East Africa, it's globally. So there are thousands and thousands of attempts that are being done to try to measure, protected area management effectiveness. I want to repeat, it's not protected area effectiveness, it's protected area management effectiveness. I was intrigued by, actually, when I was trying to prepare this, to know the position of Africa relative to the other parts of the world. So I'm trying to share with you some slides which will show where does Africa stand when we say our areas are managed properly or not. This is taking the whole of Africa area, 25% experience some sort of management effectiveness tracking tool. That means some sort of experimentation of trying to measure management effectiveness. So we are not like the graphs. Most of these methodologies are dictionary methodologies. I'll conclude that later. But these many, and they are housed in the global database of protected area. There is a global database of protected area management effectiveness with thousands and thousands of these studies with conclusions about regions. This is some of that I'm displaying here. So they have what they call management scores. If we give you maybe 3.1, you are very weak. If we give you 5, you're okay. If we give you 6, you are excellent. You have minor adjustment and so forth and so forth. Adjustment and so forth and so forth. these are some of scholars, attempts to try to see how these areas are some of the key issues that come out of the discussion. WWF 2007, they did a 2-year study of what these researchers do. They access the global database and try to analyze to see what are the patterns. Yeah, you can see scores of anything like this. It means there is a problem. When you are not up to 50, it means there is a problem. Now my duty was to try to find weak scores by region, to know whether actually Africa is falling in the weak scores or not. I don't go into this is just a coverage of, you can see all the dots, the types of protected areas on the African continent, those that are state-owned, communal, private, combination. And this is interesting. This shows conservation value against pressure, against pressures. There are sites that have great conservation value, but they don't have pressure. In Tanzania, I can very quickly think of Gombe, at least 10 years back. It has only one village adjacent, and so if you assess it, you find it scores maybe 7.5 or 9, but there is no pressure. Now this complicates again. How would we measure conservation effectiveness? Because there is no pressure. So there is importance of linking the outcome value plus the pressures. So that's a map showing that relationship for Africa. This is also interesting. This guy examined 741 protected areas around the world, and he mapped. So the more you are to the right, the higher biodiversity you have. The more you are up, the more that site is pressured. And although it's not fitted, you can see. Yeah, those sites with high values tend to attract a lot of pressure from the communities. And that is also depicted by country. Tanzania is somewhere here. So you can see, if you compare, for example, Rwanda has a lot of value, but a lot of anthropogenic pressure, pressing. That is an average of those values per protected areas within that particular country. So all these analysis comes from this huge database, but like I said, the complication again is like they are collected using different methodologies. That's one complication. If I narrow to Eastern and Southern Africa, which perhaps some of us are more familiar, you can see, but most important is the number of records that have been undertaken. This is I don't know, Uganda. There is no country which has not undertaken this particular, management effectiveness assessments, and protected area management effectiveness results from the analysis. For example, from this publication by Obama again, it shows for East Africa that the yellow one is inadequate. Unfortunately, Cebu is inadequate, 3.3. Some of the basic, you can see the spatial disposition, but this one also shows the average scores for headline indicators of management effectiveness. It goes, that one now it narrows down. And these are huge number of assessments. It's not just one or two, okay? And this is for East Africa. But again, there is this category, according to the context, the format of analyzing management effectiveness. How much time do I have?
Well, you have spent 15 minutes, so you have 5 minutes remaining.
Okay, I'll finalize just now. So the context, planning, input, you can collapse all of these into these particular categories. Later on, I will show that we are very good in planning. We score 8.3, 8.5. But when it comes especially to outcome globally is very weak, globally. The system, when you measure things on the ground, does not match, the processes and things that we spent in this particular area. So, this is just to indicate how much effort has gone. All these are types of assessments in West Africa, West Central and East. And this is the trend of East and South Africa by year, meaning that there have been increasing number of studies over the years in this particular subject, both by number, also by area. And the most important thing I wanted to show is this one. I don't intend you to read all of this, but you can see some of the very, very clear constraint or support by external political and civil environment. Constraint or support, which is a context aspect. It's dark. This is a global mean. That is a global mean. Yeah. This one shows the comparison by region. So you can see when we say hunting, killing, collecting terrestrial animals on protected area as an issue globally. How do Africa stand, Asia, Europe, you can see it's not like, this is #1 rank as a problem in protected area management. It stands number 62 for Africa, 46 Europe, 29 for Europe, and Latin America and Caribbean, 27. What I want to show here is that it's mixed. You cannot find very clear pattern saying Africa is this, Europe is this, and particular Latin America, whatever, is that. It's all mixed. Very quickly, there are challenges that are complicating protected area management effectiveness. We see that institutional incentives. When you do what I call questionnaire-based or expert opinion, some sites or some managers have indicated they can deflate. They can say this site is very bad because they want to attract funding. Yeah. So that's a very big complication that's difficult to handle. But also policies, some policies institutions, they lack very clear direction on how to handle issues of monitoring, especially of this particular sort. Another key issue that perhaps you should know is that it can be difficult to separate change that is caused by conservation against that which has been made by another factor. Okay? So I'm finishing, Professor. Very quickly, I'm saying these methods are numerous. They are very diverse. They are being practiced globally, and they are being promoted by multinationals. They are being promoted by environmental, agents, by UN agents. But if you try to analyze, it has been difficult. And they started 90s, late 80s, early 90s. You cannot find pattern. I've read several papers. All the authors say we have to come back to the drawing table to devise methods that perhaps can work. That's one. Second, a more strong advocacy is on combining the methodologies. That is, you ask Raswai, how is a protected area? I would say, fine, you give it 6. because you believe he's saying okay, but you have to combine with empirical studies, you know, remote sensing, whatever, so that you can really, you know, testify what he's saying. That has been lacking throughout. Thank you very much for attention.
Thank you. This is very important. Unfortunately, we don't have time now, but we have time after for a general discussion. I think we should raise some of these issues during the general discussion. But we have to go on, so to keep up with time, we are already 1 hour behind, remember that? So now is Jane Labichange, that's you? That's you? Okay, come up please. Yeah. And yeah, I guess that we will see the title on the board. Okay, yeah, can you go?
It's really a privilege for me to be here today. When Dr. James asked me if I could come and talk, it gave me an opportunity not only to speak at Mweka, which is an institution that I've known about for a very long time, but it also gave me a chance to come home because I grew up in Tanzania, in Ngorongoro and Serengeti, and so it's always wonderful being able to come back to a place that is so close to me. So my name is Jean Labiscafni and I am the Director for Conservation Development at African Parks. We are a conservation organization that is headquartered in South Africa, but we work all across Africa. I am based in Johannesburg, and today I'm just going to speak a little bit about what it is that African Parks does, how the partnerships that we enter into with governments and with communities can help to unlock the full value of protected areas through good management, and explain a little bit what some of the impact that we have had across the continent has been to date. So at African Parks we have a saying that is, what is not being managed today will be lost tomorrow. And I think Dr. James just gave a good introduction to the importance of management effectiveness. Everything in the world has to be managed. Whether you have a school, whether you have a shop, whether you have an organization, it needs management. And protected areas need management just as much as anything else. Everything from the roads, to the vehicles, to the control room, to the tourism. And if we look at Africa today, I think the World Database of Protected Areas states that Africa has around 8,500 gazetted protected areas on the continent. How much of those are still in place in reality? That is a screenshot from Ivory Coast and Liberia. I can't remember the exact number of protected areas in that screenshot, but you can see them, there are a lot. If you overlay the deforestation and the human footprint layer on top of that, you can see that there are effectively only Tai and Sapo in Liberia that are really still functioning today. In fact, in a number of the protected areas, this is Marua National Park, you can see that the deforestation is actually the most intense inside the protected areas, because those forest reserves and national parks are the only area that still had forest left. That picture, maybe not as dramatic across the entire continent, but it is being seen elsewhere. If you had to look at this whole Sahara belt, or the Sahel belt, from a satellite image perspective, the Sahel 30 years ago was literally in the Sahara belt. Today, it's about to hit the Gulf of Guinea. And it is only these few protected areas that have that last bit of Guinea forest left. So if we look at African parks, everyone always asks us, well, why were you created? And it's not the founders didn't just sit around a table and decide one day that they wanted to create a protected area. We created, an organization. We created the African Parks Organization because we saw how there were so many protected areas in Africa that were failing because of a lack of management, which typically comes back to a lack of financial resources and a lack of technical resources. And just as an example of that, we work in a country in Africa today where the national ranger salary for a wildlife ranger is $2 a month. Now, how do you expect those rangers to do their job in their national parks if that is the public budget that has been given to them to do their work? So there is an incredibly huge need for financial and technical resources in Africa today that governments are struggling to meet because they have economic needs, they have healthcare, they have education, and conservation, unfortunately, is often right at the bottom of the ladder. So we were founded to effectively create a management service provider for protected areas. So we partner with governments and often with communities as well, and we do their management for them as a service provider. But the difference is that we don't expect a fee. We actually bring the funding to be able to cover those costs, and that then creates budget relief so that the government's funding that was going to that protected area can now go to either a different protected area or to different conservation activities in the country. So the first two partnerships that we ever signed were in 2003. The very first one was actually instigated by the Barotse Rural Establishment, which is a kingdom or a community in western Zambia, which we believe actually created the very first protected area in the world, even before Yellowstone in America. And that was signed in 2003, and then 1 year later was Majeti Wildlife Reserve in Malawi. And we are still managing both of those areas 20 years later in partnerships with those communities and with those governments. So if we now try to explain what it is we do, because we get a lot of questions and there is a lot of misunderstanding about what the model is. So I always try and explain it with the 3 levels of governance. So I'm going to start at the top, come to the bottom, and then come into the middle. At the top, at the macro level, is always the government partner. We do not own a hectare of land of the areas that we manage in partnership with governments. The governments are always the owners. We do not want to own the land. They also determine the legislation, they determine the policy, and they ensure the statutory oversight of that area in all of the countries that we work. If we then come to the bottom level, at a micro level, this is for the day-to-day management at each park. Is Musa, the grader driver, going to grade this road or this road today? Or are the rangers going to go on patrol in this area or in that area? That is then devolved, and that management responsibility is given to African parks for that specific time period within that partnership. The management then comes together, or the governance comes together in the middle level. That's where the marriage happens. Every single protected area that we manage has a local board. So we currently manage 22 protected areas in Africa. Every single one has a local board that is responsible for that strategic oversight, for approving every annual business plan, every annual budget, and checking every audited financial statement in that year. And that board has African parks, it has the government. If we have a community signatory, the community will sit on that board. In Zambia, we have one area that we have signed with 6 chiefs. Every chief sits on that board and is part of ensuring that that plan and that budget is approved. And then key stakeholders. And the day-to-day management is really, as I explained, that day-to-day management, and because we are the entity that is responsible for that, we are directly accountable to government. If anything happens at a park level that is not going well, government has one entity to hold responsible. It's not a finger pointing, it says, but they are responsible for this, this was not our problem. It is African parks who is held responsible for any issue that happens at a ground level. And because of those separation of responsibility, it means that the government has a really clear partner to hold accountable so that they can really force those good results to happen on the ground and ensure that that project management effectiveness, as Dr. James explained, can lift up. At each individual park level, so at that management at the bottom, we implement what we call the 3 M's. And these are kind of like our ingredients for every single protected area. The first one is the mandate. So my role within African Parks is looking for, identifying and negotiating the new agreements that we have in partnership with governments and communities. Those agreements are typically 20-year agreements because conservation, as we all know, is not a quick game. It's a long game. It takes a lot of investment, a lot of work to really start to get the real value add. There are very clear roles and responsibilities defined in that agreement. Those agreements can take anything from 1 year to negotiate to 20 years. Our longest agreement took 20 years to negotiate. But because we remain committed to our government partner, we will continue having that discussion no matter how long it takes, because we are there for the government partner first and foremost. Second level is what we call management. I think we all understand what that is, but every single park that we manage is considered as a separate business unit within the organization. And we implement what we call these 3 pillars, irrespective of location. We implement these in Central African Republic, in South Sudan, in Chad, every single one. Biodiversity conservation, that's all your law enforcement, all the research, all the biodiversity conservation activities like reintroduction of animals, alien invasive plant control, that all sits in this pillar. Community development, incredibly important, and we cannot ensure that these areas are sustained in the future without the community buy-in. And so we do community development in multiple different areas. And then of course there is park revenue generation, that is all your tourism activities, any other economic honey or shea butter or fish harvesting sits within this pillar. And of course the finance and infrastructure. But importantly, that management is done within a very clear framework. So it's the legislation of the government, of the country that we work in. We respect that legislation, of course. We have standard operating procedures that are very strict, that we respect in all the parks that we manage. Any established use rights, the mandate that we have agreed, and then that business plan and budget, which is agreed at that board level that I showed you in the previous slide, this middle level. For every park, that business plan and budget is approved with government and the communities or stakeholders and ourselves, and that is within that framework that the park manager will operate. The park manager cannot go outside of this framework, otherwise he will be fired. Money. We cannot do what we do without money, so what we do is we create an enabling environment for revenue generating activities at the park level. Important in our agreements is that the money that is generated in Park A is reinvested into Park A. And whatever we still need after that revenue, we will then find through donor funding. And through that improved management, you are able to attract not only commercial investors for lodges, but good donor funding to cover that shortfall, because you've got strong governance, you've got strong planning, and you've got strong accountability with our partners, and that's something that donors really, really like. So if we look at African parks today, as I said, we're currently managing 22 protected areas in 12 different countries. That amounts to around 20 million hectares under management. We currently have around 5,200 employees, 98% of which all from the national countries which they operate in. Our budget for this year was $110 million for the entire portfolio for the year. About 10% of that is coming from tourism revenue. Everything else, the 90%, we have to raise through our donor funding to be able to fund that portfolio. But because this 10% that is raised locally through commercial revenue generating activities is reinvested into these areas, donors then see, okay, that park has done their best to make the money locally, and we are now funding the shortfall. And that attracts very good donor funding to these areas. And then I think just to show everything from Bazaruto, which is a marine protected area in Mozambique, up to Penjari and W, which are 2 national parks in northern Benin. With that diversity in portfolio comes a real diversity in challenges. If any of you are following what's happening in the Sahel at the moment, Benin and Penjari and W are literally on a constant attack from Islamic extremists through the Sahel belt. We have had countless rangers killed, not being shot, but killed by explosive devices that are put in the ground, which means we can no longer use roads. We have to do all of our anti-poaching off roads because that's where they are planting the explosive devices. Our challenges down in Bazaruto is a completely different nature. There we're dealing with illegal fishing, with different fishing methodologies, with a population growth rate that is way too high for a very small island that is resource poor. But it's the same model being applied from Bazaruto to Benin, and because it has got the right fundamentals, it can handle that diversity. And the diversity also brings diversity in solutions. So what we are learning in Benin, we can help to apply in the parks that we manage in South Sudan, in Central African Republic, in Chad. just quickly, this is an established model now. It started in 2003. There's now 50 odd such partnerships in Africa with about 13 different organizations. And for anyone who doesn't know, this document is an incredibly helpful and good document to download from the internet. I can share it with Dr. James. Just gives a very good overview. And I've just got 3 slides, so don't worry on slide time. And then just as a quick recap, as I said, and also Dr. James said, if we can get our protected area managed well, there is such a host of societal benefits and conservation benefits that can come from that. And we look at it with the ecosystem services, that economic and social impact, and also then the security and governance and stability that comes from a well-managed protected area. Irrespective of those diverse contexts that I explained earlier, if you get the fundamentals right for protected area management, from Benin to Bazaruto, they will result in these impacts across the board. And just quickly from an African Parks perspective, just some of our impacts that we've had over the last couple of decades. We've got 3 billion tons of carbon, standing carbon in our portfolio that we are protecting. We've had a restoration of 35 species, so we've taken rhino back to countries like DRC and Chad. We've moved over 1,000 elephants in Malawi manually, so we've done an enormous amount of reintroduction work. We have an average of 50% increase in wildlife populations across the board of all the parks we manage within the first 5 years. And we are also protecting some key catchments from some of Africa's largest rivers. In terms of the economic and social, so this is just from last year alone, over 27,000 people benefited from sustainable livelihoods. The salaries is over $40 million across Africa going directly into salaries. Those are stable income salaries for these people, which has an amazing local economic impact in countries, especially like Central African Republic, South Sudan, Chad, where there are very minimal opportunities for employment. Over 50,000 people benefited from healthcare, and in the past 5 years we've had 500,000 visitors to our parks. But what is really exciting is that 60% of those are local people. It's not always the international tourism. And then just on the security and governance, so in the last 5 years, over 100,000 snares taken out of the parks. You will all know what an impact snares will have on conservation. 850 firearms and 45,000 rounds of ammunition. In a country like Congo or DRC, a firearm is not only used for poaching elephants. It is very often used for rebel activity. We have Lord's Resistance Army that have been found poaching ivory in parks in DRC. Having those weapons and that ammunition out of the system has a broader societal benefit. Poaching eliminated or decreased in every park, and we are protecting just over 14,000 elephants in our portfolio, and we only lost 15 known elephants in last year. But important on the law enforcement is the very, very clear chain of command. If we are going to be accountable to our government partner for good results on the ground, we have to be able to manage the people so that we can ensure if somebody does anything wrong or outside of the law, that we can ensure they go through the disciplinary process and if need be are sent through into the judicial system. And that is a jugular thing for us in all of the agreements that we enter into. And then I think just lastly, we have an internal African Parks WhatsApp group, and everyone from the parks posts photos every single day. And 2 days ago, the team in Chad in Zakuma posted this picture, and I thought it was just a reminder of why we are all doing what we are doing. Yes, it's for conservation, yes, it's for wildlife, but it's for these kids so that one day they still can go out and see what it is that we are all working towards.
Thank you, Jane. Always to prepare 15 minutes, we'll last 20 minutes, but we can have one short question. And stand up, please, and speak slowly, yes.
Yeah, thank you. My name is William Tuango. Very short questions. Your revenue from tourism is 10% of your total revenue, right?
Yes.
So what will happen if a park does not develop the revenue and you don't have the donor funding? I'm saying this because we know the risks of global pandemics like COVID-19, we have the challenges of climate change, and then yet we have the ongoing wars in Israel and Ukraine. So donors sometimes funding priorities change. So what they're going to do is the donors because they're funding, don't get funding from donors and yet to generate 10%. I'm going to return the parts to the government.
So as I explained, the three ingredients, the mandates, management, money. Money is a key ingredient for what we do. If we as African parks cannot make the money locally through tourism and not raise the funding through donor net out, and maybe you could find a different partner. However, in 23 years, we have never not been able to close our funding gap. So this year we started with $25 million that we had to find from donor funding, and we closed it. So next year will be the same. So it's a commitment that we make to government that we will find that donor funding, and it's been an incredibly, because of the model, it attracts very good donor funding.
Okay, sorry, we have to proceed, but we can save some of your questions and not the general discussion after, because I'm sure there's a lot of questions to all these talks. So we have to run into the last speaker before we take a health break. And you know that 20 minutes is not a long time. So the next speaker will be Professor Kokel Melubu